So who were the Romans? Where did they come from? To answer that, we need to go back 2,800 years. For the Romans themselves, they didn't clearly know where they had ultimately come from. As far as they knew for fact, is around 800 BC, there were tribes living in central Italy who spoke the language that would become Latin. The Romans were not the only people speaking this language throughout the area that they called Latium. Today it's Lazio, um, along the western coast of central Italy were other Latin-speaking tribes. To the southeast, there were other tribes speaking closely related dialects and languages. Now, from what we know today, it seems like the original Latin speakers were descendants of Indo-European tribes who had come perhaps 1,000 years earlier from the north. But by the time written history begins, no one has any memory of this having happened. Now, the later Romans did claim that their ancestors were those people who had escaped from Troy when the city fell to the Greeks. According to legend, Aeneas, one of the Trojan princes, led those survivors to settle in central Italy after a brief stop in North Africa. But there is really no reason to think this is based on any genuine traditions or memories. Instead, it's a story that was adopted by the Romans to place themselves in a central role in Greek literature and mythology, while maintaining the fact that they, like the Trojans, were not Greeks. They were equal to the Greeks, but not Greek. Instead, what we know, when the Romans first appear, central Italy is dominated by the people who lived to the north, a group called the Etruscans. The Etruscans were not Indo-Europeans. Their language has no real modern relatives. Unlike the Latins, the Etruscans had, 2,800 years ago, a fairly advanced civilization with cities, a written language, and so on. The Romans would borrow heavily from the Etruscans and be heavily indebted to them in the long run. At the beginning, though, they were the poor, rough neighbors to the Etruscans. Now, the Roman tradition does start the story with two people who probably were real. Twin brothers named Romulus and Remus. Later tradition will say that they were abandoned by their parents and were raised by a wolf. They would then go on when they were older and lead a band of warriors, or really bandits, and achieve a certain notoriety in that area of central Italy. Of course, one can think, what sort of people would spread the story that they were orphans who had been raised by wolves? And we can kind of guess maybe something about how pleasant the guys Romulus and Remus would have been. Now, Romulus and Remus and their followers, on April 21st, 753 BC, at approximately 9 in the morning, founded the city of Rome. The two brothers competed over which one would be king fell to Romulus. The city would be named after him, and ultimately he would kill Remus. The city that they've established is on the banks of the river Tiber. It is not a very large place. It is really a village that is the central village of a group of 7 villages on the 7 hills of Rome. Its location is strategic. The Tiber is one of the longest rivers reaching the Mediterranean on the west coast of the Italian peninsula, and Rome is at the place on the river that the first place where you can cross the river coming inland from the sea. It's at a point where small ships could reach it directly from the sea. So is well positioned to be a center for the local area. And the expectation would be that this village might one day grow to be a decent sized little town, which it will start to do. Now, Romulus and Remus have a problem. Having set up a town with their band of warriors, they're missing one essential thing to have a lasting city, which is women. So they go on a raid against the Sabines, a neighboring tribe, and kidnap the women. Enough women that every one of these founding fathers of Rome can have a wife. This is known as the Raid of the Sabine Women and marks the beginning of the Roman kingdom. The later Romans would, especially the most aristocratic and upper class families, would look back to this event as the moment when the founders of their families met. I personally think it must have a basis in reality because it doesn't seem like the sort of thing one would make up about one's own ancestors. Now, Romulus eventually dies. He's followed by other kings, and in total, there will be 7 kings of Rome, according to later tradition. How real any of these are and how confident we can be about any of the stories of them is another question. But we do know that this town in Italy has kings for close to 250 years. The last king, Tarquin, or Tarquin the Proud, as he was called, led an expedition of men from Rome against another nearby town. While he was gone, his son, Sextus, assaulted and raped a noble woman of the family of Lucretius, her name being Lucretia. She, afterwards, goes out into the Forum, the main square of the town of Rome, and decries what he has done to her. She calls for the men of Rome, if they have any honor, to avenge her, and kills herself in front of the crowd of Romans. Now, the leading men of Rome killed Sextus, and they killed Tarquin. In fact, the death of Tarquin is by this man, Brutus, who is the founder of one of the greatest of Roman families. With Tarquin dead, Brutus and the other leading men of Rome decide they do not need a king anymore. And so in the year 509 BC, they will turn Rome into a republic. Now, the Roman Republic that they establish has a number of peculiarities. First, it is a republic. The word republic comes from Latin. The Latin phrase is res publica, which is the thing of the people. The Romans will put the letters SPQR as the symbol of the Roman Republic, Senatus Populusque Romanus, Senate and people of Rome. It is a republic, it is not a democracy. Because Rome is a divided society. There are two classes of free Roman citizens at the beginning. The patricians, who are the descendants of those original founders of Rome, will remain sort of the nobility. The plebeians will be below them. The patricians will control most of the land. They will always be, after the time of Romulus, a minority, and they will try to control the republic as completely as they can. Most of the offices in the Roman Republic will be held by them. The plebeians, who are more numerous, are the descendants of people who moved to Rome and became citizens. They are, the middle working class Romans. They would have been the small farmers, merchants, craftsmen in the city. They will have some political rights. They can elect the assembly and serve it. This is true for the men. Roman women have very limited rights. They cannot own property. They could own property. They have more rights than the Greeks, but they have no political rights. Under the Roman system, a woman is considered the property of her husband until she is married, at which point she is the property. She is the property of her father until she is married, at which point she becomes the property of her husband. Though Roman women can divorce. Now, in Roman family law, the father has, as head of household, has almost unlimited rights within his own home. It's called pater potestas. The father has the right to kill his children or his wife if they disgrace or dishonor him or commit some sort of crime. And in fact, oftentimes, Roman fathers will be expected to kill wayward children. Women also have another very peculiar thing. And I've always wondered if this goes back to that origin of the women of Rome. Now, Romans have three-part names. They have an individual first name for Roman men. There are about 7 or 8 of these names, Marcus, which is what you would call someone to their face. They have a gens name, which is a family name, like Julius, and a third name that is their sub-family name, their cognomen, like Caesar. So Julius Caesar would be Caius Julius Caesar. There will be many Juliuses, not all of them are Julius Caesars. There'll be many Caiuses, not all Caiuses will be of the so on. Now, if you are a woman born to a man of your name, Julia, just Julia. If you are the first daughter, you'll be Julia Prima, Julia the First. A second daughter will be Julia Secunda, and so on. Julia the Second, Julia the Third, Julia the Fourth. All sisters, which seems incredibly impersonal. Later on, Roman women will have individual given names. Now, of course, there is another class of people living in Rome, which are the slaves. Slaves are not citizens. Slaves do not have political rights. At the beginning, a Roman citizen could be reduced to slavery if he ran up too many debts, or she ran up too many debts. Roman slavery has some very peculiar things. Like if you are a Roman slave, you can, when you are freed, become a Roman citizen. This is one of the most interesting things about Roman society that is very different from Athens or most other societies of the ancient world. Anyone can become a Roman citizen simply by living in Rome. Now, the government of Rome, as the Republic is set up, is divided between these two classes. All patricians and plebeians can vote, be represented in the assembly. The assembly will have the right to vote on laws. The assembly will vote on the two consuls, who are patricians, who are the executives elected for a 1 year. They also will elect the tribunes, who will have the goal of representing all Roman people and protecting their rights. The Senate, though, is the most powerful. The Senate has the ability to make laws. The Senate votes on war. The Senate makes peace. There are 300 members of the Senate normally. They are all patricians. Once you're in the Senate, you're in the Senate for life. The Senate is basically the supreme authority. It gets its name from a word, senex, meaning old man. It is the gathering of the old men. We also get senile from the same word. And at the very beginning, the Roman Senate is the elders of the town of Rome. And if we remember that Rome is basically a big village when the Republic is established, the idea of the village elders makes a great deal of sense. The Senate is the totally powerful, totally in control, and will remain in control for a very long time. Now, there are other offices set up within the government. Praetors, who are judges. Later on, they will be governors of the provinces that the Romans create. Aediles, who will be in charge of administrating the Roman state. Quaestors, censors, and so on. There are no police in the city of Rome, which is interesting. Now, all of these things together make Rome slightly unusual at the beginning. But Rome is not initially a particularly strange place. During the early Republican period, the villages slowly turn into a town and become a city. Rome becomes the main trading center of central Italy. And it's a place that people want to move. It is largely because of that fact that once you move to Rome, you can become a Roman. Once you are a Roman, you are a plebeian, but you are still a Roman. You have the protection of Roman law, the freedom and rights of a Roman citizen, something you would not have elsewhere as an immigrant. Rome though, is small, as I've said. And it is not particularly powerful. It is subjected to attack, and the city is burned in 387 BC by a tribe of Celts coming from northern Italy and ultimately from somewhere in northern Europe. As they rebuild, the Roman Senate, the assembly, and the people in general begin thinking, we need to keep this from ever happening again. And Rome begins slowly to take over territories beyond the city. Within a few decades, they've unified central Italy. As they unite central Italy, this brings them into conflict with people a little further out. Other towns, notably a city of Capua, will seek out Roman protection and try to join with Rome. Of course, that means the enemies of Capua become the enemies of Rome. The Romans then have to defend their new frontiers. And the Roman Senate has a very peculiar thing. If you ask the Romans legally never started a war. They only fought defensive wars. The fact that they usually won their wars and ended up conquering the people they fought against, well, that's just a happy coincidence. But slowly, Rome takes over more and more of Italy. And within about a century, most of central Italy is under their control. They've conquered the Etruscans, they've conquered the Samnites and the Sabines, the Pisans, and other peoples nearby, and brought them under their control. Oftentimes, though, while they will conquer these enemies or former enemies, they do not take all of their land. Instead, they'll take a portion of the land, which will become Roman territory and will be settled by Roman citizens. But most of the cities of Italy remain on paper independent. They have simply recognized Rome as their greatest ally and given Rome the right to conduct foreign policy and things like that for them. They can no longer make war on their own, and they must give precedence to Romans while being completely free to run their own affairs. And this would be a straightforward enough situation, except there is a man named Pyrrhus. Pyrrhus is the king of Epirus, which is the land closest to Italy across the Adriatic Sea in northern Greece and Albania today. He is a cousin of Alexander the Great, and he harbors the ambition of being the second Alexander. Alexander went from Macedon eastward, conquering the world. Pyrrhus hopes to go west, conquering the world. He brings the Greek cities of southern Italy and Sicily under his control. But he has two great enemies, the two strongest cities in the Western Mediterranean: Rome, further north in Italy, and Carthage in North Africa. These two cities ally against him and aid each other. The Carthaginians provide the navy, the Romans provide the army, and together they will be able to defeat Pyrrhus. Well, in the war, but not in battle. Pyrrhus wins a massive victory over the Romans and their allies. However, at the end of the victory, most of his soldiers are dead. And he realizes while he's won the battle, he's lost the war and will go home. We get the phrase Pyrrhic victory from him. When he leaves, the territories he had conquered in southern Italy now fall under Roman authority. And by the time we come to 270 BC, southern Italy, central Italy, in fact, most of the Italian peninsula is under a single government, that of the city of Rome. And Rome will begin to grow in the coming years beyond Italy, slowly transforming from a town to a city ruling most of Italy to eventually an empire controlling virtually the whole world. Thank you.